Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Project Unity's Listen and Learn series for this summer. My name is Charlene Edwards, Director of Programs and Events for Project Unity, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to our first speaker for our summer speaker series. At this time, I am going to introduce Richie Butler, founder of Project Unity, who will introduce our speaker for tonight and share a little bit about Project Unity and the importance of us sharing opportunities to listen to someone else's story and walk in someone else's shoes. Richie, welcome and take it away.
All right. Thank you, Charlene. Again, welcome everyone for joining us on this evening for our Listen and Learn. I'm excited, enthused, and overjoyed to have the opportunity to introduce an individual who really needs no introduction in this North Texas community in the person of Jim Schutze. He is a journalist and a writer based here in Dallas. He has received numerous awards from the National Association of Black Journalists Award for Commentary to the Association of Alternative News Weekly's National Award for Commentary twice, Lincoln University's National Unity Award for writing on civil rights and race issues three times. He also was admitted to the Texas Institute of Letters in recognition of his career as a journalist and author in 2011. He has a Herald career. He has been a columnist for Dallas D Magazine. He's been a columnist for the Dallas Observer from 98 to 2020. He was the bureau chief for the Houston Chronicle from 1996 to 1998, and from 1978 to 1991, he was the Metropolitan Page columnist for the Dallas Times Herald. And for those who are too young to remember the Herald, I was in college when it was around. So Jim is really a living legend in this community, and probably most noted for his nonfiction book work, and in particular, The Accommodation, The Politics of Race in an American City. And when one of my mentors first moved to Dallas to lead a congregation here, the book that he was given to acquaint himself with the North Texas community, in particular Dallas, was The Accommodation. And it really has been an important treasure to preserving, educating, and helping to transform lives and get us to see each other and to improve race relations in our community. So we are honored on this evening to have none other than Jim Schutze to offer us this conversation. So Jim, thank you for joining us, and I will turn it over to you.
It's great to be here. And I always like to point out that living legend means not dead yet. Uh, when I was starting out in the business in my early 20s, I was a young reporter in Detroit for the Detroit Free Press. Walking around, we wore a tie and coat back then with a notebook, asking people nosy questions. I wouldn't say that Detroit was a black city then. That's a misnomer. It was just a city where black people felt very empowered. And black people, I think, as far as how people treated me, I felt like black people in Detroit when I was there were more friendly with me than they were in other places. But black people kind of didn't let you get away. They didn't let certain things slide. If you said something really dumb, white, somebody in the room would sort of ask you, "Why, Jim? Why do you say that? Where does that come from?" I thought I had a get out of jail free card on race because I was an ex hippie, probably still a bit of a hippie back then, and my parents were liberals. And what I found in walking around the city and trying to do my job was that I I don't know if the word racist applies, but I was way more racial than I knew. I was way more white than I knew. I had way more white perceptions, white ways of engaging with people. A black colleague of mine who was trying to help me out said, Jim, you're really good at reading strangers on the street if they're white, because this was part of our job. She said, but if the stranger on the street is black, your eyeballs stop at skin. And I said to her, are you calling me a racist? And she said, not yet, but if you keep running your mouth, we'll get there. And so I went home that night and thought about it long and hard and thought, oh, wow, the whiteness in me really doesn't have jack to do with liberal conservative almost or philosophy. It's not a philosophy. It's stuff I guess I was taught as a kid, and I'll come back to that part about being a kid. So I moved here in 1978 when I was 32 years old. Coming from Detroit, this place was a shock. I've been in other southern cities. Some Dallas was not like those cities. Black people and white people here almost didn't meet each other's eyes. The city was severely segregated geographically, north and south. And back then, the money difference was really striking. North was going and blowing, as they like to say, lots of money on the street. South was very poor. If you kept going way south and crossed into Mexico into Matamoros, Matamoros made southern Dallas back then look, Matamoros looked rich next to southern Dallas. So you kind of felt like you needed a passport to go from North Dallas to South Dallas. The story in Dallas from official Dallas, and I was covering City Hall. I was a columnist covering city politics. Don't ask me why somebody hires a guy from Detroit to cover city politics in Dallas, but they did. And the story I got consistently was that, oh no, we never had that mess like they had in Selma and Birmingham, and certainly not what you had up there in Detroit. We've never had any, this is coming from powerful white people. And they're saying, we've never had any trouble. And black people here love it like this. This is how they want it. You know, they keep to their own, and they have their own ways. And we've just worked it out. In 1984, I'd been here 6 years, and the Reagan re-election convention, Republican National Convention, was here. And Dallas really stepped up the story about how Dallas had never had any bad riots. Dallas had done everything the right way. I say Dallas, I mean white, rich, powerful Dallas. Had this story that Dallas had sort of always kept the boot on the neck, and that had worked really well. And they were preaching this at a national presidential convention. So they were saying, this is the direction the city needs to go. And this is just before, it's about a year before I was approached with the idea of writing my book, The Accommodation. So around that time, I had this visit with my brother in Oakland, California, my older brother. We were sitting up late at night drinking beer, talking about our childhoods. I remembered this thing that happened when I was in third grade. I had forgotten it. It wasn't like one of those psychologically suppressed memories. It's just something I forgot because I was a little kid. My dad was an Episcopal minister. We lived on a street called Division Street in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which called itself the Athens of the Middle West. 2 blocks away was a school called Jones School, which was called by everyone the colored school. And it's where black kids were supposed to go. Now it was the North, and we won the Civil War and stuff. So of course we didn't have segregation. But everybody on one side of Division Street was black, everybody on the other side was white, and everybody knew white people don't send their kids to Jones School. So my mother, and this is another story, but we won't go into the weeds on, My mother was not just a liberal, she hated bigotry. And she never told me why. Grown-ups didn't explain themselves to kids in those days. Anyway, she sent me to Jones School. So I went there for 2 years. There were some other white kids in the school, but I was the only white kid in my first and second grade classes. And then I got switched to the white school across town. And as soon as I got there, I was in deep trouble. I had to see the principal. I had to see all these other adults. They made me put round pegs in square holes. I learned later that was the psychiatrist. There was something badly wrong with me. They never told me what it was. It's a big blow up meeting with my parents. And then it was over. And then the problem went away. And no one ever told me what the problem was. So jump ahead 30 years. I'm talking to my brother late at night in Oakland. And I said, what was all that stuff when they switched me to the white school? And at first he said, oh, come on, Jim, you know, you're fooling me. You know what that was. And I said, no one ever told me. He said, they thought you talked like a black kid. And I said, really? I said, did I talk like a black kid? And he said, well, if you did, it was pretty subtle. We didn't notice it in the family. But he said, I have to tell you, Jim, we didn't notice you much at all anyway. I guess I was sort of a woodwork kid. So they thought I talked like a black kid. All those people I had to talk to were, I guess, speech therapists and everything. They were going to send me back to the black school. My dad threw a fit in the meet. That's the meeting. I just remember people yelling. I didn't know. It just scared me. I didn't know what they were talking about. Anyway, they didn't send me back to the black school. I stayed at the white school. And the problem went away, obviously, because I started talking like a white kid after a while. So my brother reminded me of this. He said, do you think that experience made you like more understanding of race or more of a liberal? And I said, no, not according to my experience at the Free Press. I was as white and as dumb as they come. So they whited me up pretty good after those years. But I did think about it, and I thought how interesting in what it says about white people, because white people teach their kids, oh, we're just like this because we're born this way. No, we talk like this because this is how the Lord wanted us to talk. This is genetic. We're dogs, they're cats, or they're cats, we're dogs. We're just born like this. So the little white boy talking like a black kid makes that matrix skip. It's something that the white and in Ann Arbor, the main trouble my brother told me came from parents at the school who were university faculty at the University of Michigan. Even back then, this was a place that would consider itself liberal, very progressive. These are university faculty, and they cannot have a little white boy walking around. They can hear black in my speech, sort of. My family didn't even hear it, and they're going to banish me. They're going to kick me out of the school. They can't have that. And to me, the lesson of learning what that was all about was the hidden intentionality of white. The white tells itself, no, we're just like this. This is how nature made us. But man, you better not step out of white, even by accident. Even a little kid is just talking like the other kids around him. They'll have to banish you. They can't have that. So this awareness came to me just before a guy named Bobby Frazee at Taylor Publishing here, he was about my age, white, from a wealthy old family in Birmingham, Alabama. We sat down and he said, do you think Dallas is weird about race? And I said, yeah, really weird. And he said, I do too. He said, I'm a Southerner. I come from Birmingham. But I think this place is weird. He said, you're from Detroit. You think it's weird. Are we just two young guys talking here and we just made this up? So I launched on a research project at the Dallas Public Library I was fortunate enough that there were great research historian librarians there. I told them what I was doing, and they watched me. They told me I didn't know what I was doing, that I was trying to read other people's books, and I'd never get there that way. And they hooked me up with great primary sources. They had the Library of Congress shipping me stuff on microfiche. And so the story I also found this other great historic resource called Black People in Dallas. Well, I go talk to Zan Holmes at Community Methodist and other people in the Black community, and they would steer me toward resources. The product of all of this was my book, The Accommodation. I hope I've said enough to convey that in writing this book, I wasn't some holier than thou carpetbagger from up north who thought, oh, I've discovered racism in Texas. I knew that white racism was universal in our country. I grew up with it, I guess. I didn't even know it, but I grew up with it in Ann Arbor, Michigan. What my book tried to say, and I was speaking probably definitely more to white people than to Black people, was please stop telling this story about how Black people have always accepted racism here. They never have. There is a history of armed resistance, plus many bus riots. Black people here didn't get much help from the movement elsewhere. That's another long story, and we can talk about it in questions why there was a rift between Black leadership here and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and MLK Jr. But the big lesson is slavery, if anything, was worse in Texas than it was in Dixie in the Old South. And then way worse than that is what happened after the Civil War. I didn't really get into this a lot in my book because I didn't know about it. I've read other books by professional historians since. Worse Than Slavery is one, Slavery by Another Name. Slavery continued in Texas until pretty much World War II under a system of vagrancy laws, brutal racist penal system. Black families were held on plantations here. And the reason it was worse than slavery is that it didn't, at least slavery had the color of some law to support it. Here, after the Civil War, everybody knew it was illegal, but they did it anyway through terrorism and brutality. So the history here is worse, not better, than any place else. Black people have never accepted it, except when at the threat of terror, when they had to. And I kind of said at the end of it, and I quoted at some length from then still young Dallas County Commissioner John Wally Price, kind of saying, this doesn't make Dallas the Lone Ranger. This is national. And but it doesn't, nothing is resolved here. This is not nothing is solved here. And we don't get out of this. We don't get out of the march of history. And we can sort of like do it the hard way or do it the easy way. There's no easy way, but we can do it the Detroit way, blow the city up, kill dozens of people, cause lasting scars that will endure for a half century. Or we can try to figure our way out of it like civilized human beings. My book came out in 1986. The only white person who read it was my mother, who said I should win multiple prizes for it. It was well read in Black Dallas, Black leadership, Black intelligentsia read it, and I talked to lots of people there. And then it kind of beneath the waves and was forgotten. 4 years ago, this young guy named Will Evans, who'd started a publishing company here called Deep Vellum, came to me and said, I'm going to republish your book. Well, I'm leaving out an important chapter. 6, 7 years ago, I discovered that young people were reading my book on a PDF that they were sharing online. I don't know if you've ever tried to read a whole book on a blurry PDF, but that's a job. And I was fascinated by why, and I tried to meet with them and ask them why. A lot of them had grown up in the suburbs and elsewhere. They'd come into the city. They had seen the division that still exists in the city, and they figured, well, this didn't happen by accident. Somebody did this, and they wanted to figure out who, what, how, why was the city like this? So they found their way to my book. Will Evans came to me. I didn't really know, he's a big deal now. Will Evans is like a international figure in small publishing, but he was just starting out back then. I didn't know who he was. He came to my house. We sat on the front porch. He said he was going to republish my book. And I keep thinking, yeah, and then you're going to ask me for $50, right? And you'll be gone. But I was quite wrong. He republished the book beautifully. He made a big deal out of it. The book, a group of businesses and foundations raised something like 75 grand and brought out a special paperback edition of the book, which they distributed in schools and other places. I was just astonished by the response. One guy called me up. I won't say who he represented. I don't want to embarrass him. But he called me up as if he'd never heard of me 5 minutes ago and invited me to speak to his group. And I had to bite my tongue from saying, sir, I've tried to reach you for 20 years. You've never returned a single one of my calls. I didn't say that. When you get old, you try to be less of a jerk. It doesn't always work for me. One of the huge differences between now and then was that when my book was to be published in 1986, it was actually pulled off the presses because of the interference of a private group called the Dallas Citizens Council, a business leadership group. And the executive director of the Dallas Citizens Council, the hired guy at that time, was a man named Alex Bickley, who is no longer with us. So I shouldn't talk behind his back, but the publisher had been pushing me for a month to hurry up. And he wouldn't tell me why. He said, you got to finish this book. And I would say, why? And he'd say, Jim, just get it to me, or we're not going to get it out there. And later it turned out he was getting pressure from Alex Bickley. He called me on a Friday and said, Jim, we made it. The book is on the presses. It's going to run Monday. And then Monday, he called me up almost in tears. And he said, they're pulling it. They're in the back shop. They're pulling it off the presses. It's dead. It's not going to happen. And I said, Bobby, who killed it? How'd this happen? And he said, look, Jim, I got to get out of this town, get back to New York. And I know if I tell you anything, you're going to blab about it in your newspaper column. I'm sorry. I'm just not going to talk about it. The book's just dead. So I knew who had killed it. And I also knew Alex. We didn't like each other, but we talked because I was a newspaper columnist. So I called him up and said, Alex, did you kill my book? And he kind of went, damn straight. He was proud of it. And I said, okay, why did you kill my book? And he said, I remember this so clearly. He said, Jim, you are a commie, lefty, pinko, hippie, carpetbagger from Detroit. And Detroit was the worst part. And he said, you all had all kinds of mess up there, trouble, riots. We've never had a spot of that in Dallas. And you just want to come down here and stir up trouble because you're jealous. And so I heard him out and I said, Alex, how does a history book stir up the kind of trouble you're talking about? And he said, well, you're going to tell our black people all this stuff they don't need to know about. And I said, Alex, who do you think my sources were? Do you think black people forgot you bombed their houses in the 40s and 50s? Do you think black people forgot the Ku Klux Klan ran the city in the 20s? It was black people who steered me to the best stuff in my book. So as we talked, I realized, no, it's not the black people. They don't want to read this. It's the white people. It's sort of like that weird thing with my speech when I was a kid. We can't have things said. We can't see things. We can't allow things to be public that mess with our little white thing, our thing about who and what we are. We have our story down about who and what we are, and we cannot hear anything that contradicts that. So that was how the book got killed. Then a small publisher in New Jersey brought it out and shipped 5,000 copies here. Emma Rogers at Black Images was the only reason the book got out at all. And then a whole bunch of Emma's books burned up in a mysterious warehouse fire. And that was the end of that. The only reason now to go back over all that stuff about the Citizens Council is that I have to point out that when Will Evans republished my book and that special edition came out and I spoke all over town, one of the entities that helped with some of those events and helped promote the special edition was the Dallas Citizens Council. And I couldn't believe it at first. The Dallas Citizens Council has some great people in leadership positions, did then and does today. But it really forced me as an old guy to say, okay, Jim, one thing you got to do when you talk about all this is recognize the immense change that has taken place in the city. When Commissioner Price and we spoke together at a number of events that had to do with the republished book. And when we appeared together, people would say, what do you think has changed between the time the book came out and now? And I would tell my story. And sometimes I would point to Kelvin Walker, the new CEO of the Dallas Citizens Council, who was sitting right over there, who happens to be African American, who was helping with the thing. And I would say, it's the difference between Kelvin Walker and Alex Bick. To me, that is change that cannot be ignored. When I said that, and when I would get into that speech, Commissioner Price would start, he does a whole antsy thing, like he's got a crick in his back or something. And then he would say, okay, Brother Schutze here wants you to know how much the city has changed and how much better we're doing. Because they suppressed this book back in the old days, and now they brought it out. And by the way, Commissioner Price wrote the foreword to the new edition. But he would say, just please keep in mind that the life expectancy difference for a baby born in certain census tracts in southern Dallas and a baby born in census tracts in northern Dallas can be measured in decades. And not just because Commissioner Price is making it up. He was talking about public health studies and public health data. And so if we think of all those little unborn kids up there as floating around and they land on Earth randomly, and one of them lands in that census tract in southern Dallas, and one of them lands on the census tract in North Dallas. Oh boy, the one in Dallas, in North Dallas, gets 15 years more life. And what Commissioner Price would say was, before you get too proud of yourselves for the progress we've made, please ask yourself how we live with that discrepancy, that inequity. What did the unborn baby who landed in southern Dallas do to deserve decades less life? And why aren't we shocked and appalled by that? And why aren't we devoting every bit of energy we have and every bit of time that we have to redressing that imbalance? I think we are working on it. When Miguel Solis was president of the Dallas School Board, he brought about what was a momentous change in school bond issues, which was to say, look, if we're going to raise billions of dollars to build new buildings, we need to spend some of it on redressing inequity by putting resources into those southern Dallas census tracts that aren't there, public health, other things that are the reason those kids are going to die sooner. So what Miguel Solis saying was, and Commissioner Price is saying the same thing, let's be very intentional. Everything about race, everything about segregation, everything about the economic differences, those are all done things. Those are all intentional things. None of it was an accident. None of it happened naturally. All of it was done. And so let's take all the inventiveness and cleverness and energy and money and time and power that we put into doing that, and let's put the same dedication and sense of mission into undoing it. If it's done by human beings, it can be undone by human beings. So that's the end of my spiel. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, is what I was mouthing. Thank you for sharing your story, Jim.
Sure.
Thank you for providing us the historical context of questions that people have asked that your book has brought out in us. And your book will continue to make us seek answers for our own personal journey. So thank you for sharing and being very forthcoming tonight. I think
Thank you.
if we had everyone visible right now, you would probably be getting a round of applause just for sharing and opening that door of knowledge and information. So thank you for that. And I see hand claps going across the screen, Zoom hand claps and hearts and things of that nature. So yes, please send that. I think Jim might be able to see that. So we want. Can you see that?
Yeah.
You can. Awesome. Awesome. So yes, please show your hand claps and thanks of gratitude. We're going to now transition to our Q&A time. As a reminder, please place your question in the chat for the webinar chat for that. And I will go ahead and kick off the first question, Jim. Why was there a rift in Dallas with Black leaders and the SCLC?
Well, it goes back a few generations. There was a rift in the Black church between the kind of what would have been called the assimilationist wing at the time. We would call it integrationist, and a more separatist wing that sort of wasn't all that interested in living around white people. And Dallas was to some extent a center of the more separatist way of looking at life. That was a rift that involved MLK Sr., Daddy King, and clergy here. And then it was sort of inherited by MLK Jr. and clergy here. So there was MLK Jr. was not well received here. The Reverend Peter Johnson has talked very movingly about that. He was on the staff of SCLC, and he came here with Dr. King, and he remembers being on the when they were all young, and he remembers being on the plane at Love Field, and people on the SCLC staff were saying to King, "We got to come back here. You can't be treated this way. You know, we got to come back here and teach these people a lesson," meaning Black clergy, Black leadership. And Peter says that King said, "No, we have other fish to fry. We have other cities begging us to come in. And why do we want to come here and have to fight Black people before we fight white people? Forget Dallas." And so Peter was there for that moment. And it's kind of like a divorce. You know, it's not that Dallas is always, Black leadership in Dallas is accused of running off Dr. King. My understanding is it's more mutual. It's kind of like, you don't want me here, I don't want to come. I got other places to be. So there was that difference, and it's what the Reverend Zan Holmes has called a church split, you know. Anyway, that's my understanding of it.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. The next question, related to that question, this is from an individual. Your writing introduced me to Peter Johnson. Thank you. Would you have ever imagined he would be writing on the editorial pages of the Dallas Morning News?
No, not back in the day. And I think it's a testament to both sides. The editorial page now, boy, I'm impressed by it. It's run by Rudy Bush, and it's become a much more of a forum than it ever was. So I'm impressed that Rudy wants Peter, but I'm more impressed that Peter's willing to do it. Because there was a day when Peter would have said, no way am I writing for that newspaper. So it's very interesting that this has happened.
Awesome. Thank you. Our next question. In our current political climate, where pundits discuss so-called Black jobs, can you say more about what it means to sound Black in reference to your experience as a child, that you were, talking Black?
Yeah. And my problem is I truly don't remember that. I remember telling the story to a Black colleague at the Free Press, and she said, "Well, can you still sound Black?" And I said, "I don't know, I haven't tried." So I started trying to sound Black, and she immediately went, "Stop, stop." She said, "It's not working. It's gone." And she said, in fact, don't ever try that again." So, so, uh, so I'm getting a ding here. Is that that's not from you guys? Okay. Anyway,
Yeah.
The whole, and it's so different with young people now. Young people are just, they don't know what we old people are even talking about a lot of the time. The thing about Black jobs, saying Black jobs, those are all just little tells. And I'm not pinning this solely on another political party or anybody who's running. Let's just say us old white people in general, including me, I'm sure, if you listen, there are these little tells that convey how we see the world as the white world and the not white world, the Black jobs and the not Black jobs. And that's what I was talking about in Detroit. That's why Detroit was so good for me. People would say, "What do you mean Black jobs, Jim? Explain that." And then I'm blah, blah, blah. Well, I don't know. but I I think that term and a lot of what we're hearing now are little clues to how people really think.
Yeah, thank you. Our next question. In today's political climate with the presidential race, Blacks are offended at the mispronunciation of Vice President Kamala Harris's name. Do whites really not understand?
No, white people will bend over backward to pronounce a French name. Excuse me, how do you say that? You say Jacques or Jacques? Uh, uh, Everybody does that. You meet somebody, you don't want to mispronounce the person's name to his face, especially first names. And especially in this world, we have all kinds of first names. That's so deliberate and dismissive. And it's making fun. What is it making fun of about Kamala? What is it that somebody hears in Kamala that they want to make fun of? Does it sound foreign? Does it sound black? Does it sound Asian? Whatever it is, you say it wrong to make fun of it. And I mean, think of if we were in the second grade, the teacher would be saying, it's Kamala. You know, she wouldn't allow the kids to mispronounce it. And the kids wouldn't want to. So that, again, it's a deliberate little aggressive jab.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, your thoughts on that. Next question. What would be your thought from research and discussion for the number one step to take to correct the population health disparity?
Oh, well, I would spend, and this is happening to some extent, not enough, but I would spend serious bucks, big bond issue on community health, meaning getting clinics into communities, not pill dispensing clinics, clinics with ERs in them, to take care of immediate needs. Then there's the thing of food. You know, so many people, it's not just Black people, it's working white people and working Hispanic people. So many people have trouble putting food on the table and coming up with a physical environment where the children can sleep at night and be secure. So I'd be real intentional about that stuff, and reaching especially for kids, because so many of these things are set in place when people are children. So I'd draw up a list. What can we do to make sure that people have enough to eat, they're sheltered from the elements, they're safe, and they have the healthcare needs. They have their healthcare needs met.
Awesome. Thank you. And there's a couple of thumbs up going across the screen. Here's the next statement question. Do you think us old white people are still conveying things like Black jobs versus white jobs to our younger population such that they start thinking it too?
Yeah, except that I realized this whole business of my book being republished and dealing with the young white kids who were reading it taught me a lot. And one of the things it taught me was that the Creator endowed children with disrespect for their elders for a very important reason. It's so that we can't drill that stuff. The kids, I'll hurry up with this because I don't know how much time we have.
We have about 10 minutes or so. Yeah.
I had this really interesting conversation with a young white man, who was back in town. He worked for a television network in New York, but he grew up in Frisco. And he said when he was growing up in Frisco, his school classes were very diverse. Kids were from all over the world, and there were lots of there were black kids, Hispanic kids, and lots of white kids. So his father was a big time racist. And his father took, when he was about 8, his father took him and his little sister aside and said, look, you kids are bringing home all these colored kids, and you act like there are equals. And you need to know we're white. And that makes us smarter because we're white. And the young man told me that as an 8-year-old, he's listening to his dad and he's thinking his best friend at school was black. His best friend was like 5 times smarter than him, got way better grades on tests and everything. And he thought, listening to his dad, I must not be white.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I thought, and I said to him, okay, as a young man, are you not white? And he said, well, nobody's white like my dad meant it. Like you have pale skin, so you're smarter. So that doesn't exist. So I thought, what a great example of how it requires the kids being in a diverse setting when they're kids. So they make that human bond connection with each other.
Hmm.
And then I don't know that they're immune to the stuff from their parents. I'm sure that they're affected by it, but it doesn't stick quite as deep as the parents want it to. I think that explains a lot of the crazy Looney Tunes stuff that's going on up there in the suburbs. The parents will tell you that their children are being brainwashed to deprive them of their white identity. And I listen to this stuff and I think, no, they're just going to school with a bunch of black kids and Hispanic kids, and Asian kids. So I think the parents try, absolutely. But I don't think it works the way it's supposed to.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Next question. How would you place the politics of race? How would you place the politics of race in Texas in context with race in other southern states and the nation as a whole?
Well, I have to admit, I get tired of, for example, every once in a while, one of my fellow Michigan natives will talk about how terrible it is that there's all that racism in the South. And I can't help remembering the Ann Arbor thing, thinking, you think it's just in the South? I think it's different in these different places. The trouble in the North is that you have a lot of white people who've never known anybody black. I mean, it's a different kind of separation. I think it's our problems about race are national, and it's sort of a waste of time to try to decide, well, which kind is worse. Forget that. They're all bad, and they all need work. And I don't know that I believe it's worse in the South than it is in the North. I think it's bad everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. We have time for just a few more questions. How is it that there continues to be visible? Just lost that question. How is it that there continues to be visible differences in public services such as trash pickup, street maintenance, availability of standard health, groceries, etc., on any given street that runs rather continuously north and south, so along the same street, north and south, these services, same county, same city council, county commission. Is it that simple as racism that makes it different? Is it dollars, zip codes?
When I came here, those places like Renner and Addison, all those places up there, and Frisco were goat farms. There was nothing up there. The 2 biggest mayors of Dallas that I covered when I came here were Stark Taylor and Bobby Folsom. They were also the biggest owners of land up there north, and they were the biggest developers of residential neighborhoods up there. And there was huge effort to annex areas I mean, a lot of North Dallas was still undeveloped, to run streets, sewers, all kinds of infrastructure up there so that they could develop it. Now we look at Southern Dallas, which still has all kinds of vacant land. And when you ask, well, why isn't the infrastructure there? They'll tell you, well, the infrastructure follows development. And we have to wait until there's significant interest from developers, and then we'll bring the infrastructure in. Well, that ain't how you did it for the white people at all. There was a political will at City Hall to get the infrastructure up there so that those areas could be developed. And I don't see why there can't be the same will to do it in the other direction. And I do not have another explanation for that other than race.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Just a couple more questions. How would you equate books being pulled from school libraries to your book being pulled from the press? More again of concern over who they don't want to read the information.
You know, the long story of my book being pulled, I think is great because it made those young people all the more interested in the book. I think the books are being pulled because you have this desire. It goes back to what I started talking about flight and the desire to maintain this sort of fiction of flight, and we're going to expunge anything that contradicts it. And especially with young people, I mean, I remember when we told our kid that he was a little boy, he was not allowed to watch The Terminator. And we learned years later, he ran down the street to Elliot's house and said, Elliot, there's some movie called The Terminator. We got to watch it now. You know, that's what I'm talking about, that wonderful disrespect that young people have. And it's necessary. I mean, you can have too much of it. But I think it's just a sign of panic and craziness to be pulling those books.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Two more questions. Jim, thank you for providing a small snippet into your research and the republishing of your book. Moving forward, what are 2 or 3 actions that Dallas South and Dallas North citizens need to do to address, let me try to make sure I understand this. What can citizens do basically on the North and the South side to help continue to spur our growth in both areas, right? Growth on the North side, growth on the South side, 2 or 3 things that we can do.
The lesson of my long career as a local reporter is that I was a very slow student about this question. And it took me a long time to realize that it has everything to do with sewers, curbs, streets, lights, gas, water. There's everything we can do. Get the infrastructure south, put the health infrastructure south, get the school infrastructure south. Simply do the stuff south that we did to create growth north. It's the same thing. It takes a big investment up front, and the payment is a strong, wonderful community.
Awesome. Thank you. And we have just room for one more question. Trying to find out what that could be. We've had a couple of questions on CRT, banning of books and things of that nature. Can you just share your thoughts?
I'm really disappointed and angry that nobody has attacked me over CRT. I really wanted to be a CRT victim and to have my book pulled for that reason, and they're not even noticing me. The CRT thing, to be serious about it, is another expression of white weirdness. I do think the vice presidential candidate, Waltz, has a point that this stuff is just weird. You can't explain it rationally. What do you mean you don't want kids to study their history? Really? It's weird. And as I have learned in my life, we white people are weird. And it takes us a while to get over it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jim. Someone did just comment, Jim, thanks so much. Hey, I am one of the people who actually read your book when it was first published.
Oh, you're a, you and my mother are members of an elite small group.
Awesome. All right. So as we prepare to close, we again want to thank you, Jim, for
Thank you.
allowing us to walk in your shoes and listen to your story as we all take this all in to continue our own personal journeys, right? Of learning more and being better to ourselves, as we say, as well to each other. So thank you so much. There were some pre-questions about where can people get the book now? Where can people
Yes,
get the accommodation now?
you can get it at, uh, let me see if I can read this. Uh, deepvellum.org. It's all one word, DeepVellum.org. And they'll ship it to you.
Awesome. So
Deepvellum.org.
deepvellum.com, dot org,
.org. Yes.
yes. Awesome. And if you all attend a Project Unity event, every once in a while we will share one or two copies of the book as well from when the book was republished last year.
Yes.
And Communities Foundation of Texas, along with D Magazine, hosted that book and made it thousands of copies available, right?
Yes.
To the community, and we hosted it together. We dine actually based on your book.
That's a
And
Pittman.
yes, yes,
Yes.
that was a great dine. So again, thank you, Jim, so much for being with us tonight. We hope to keep you engaged with the work of Project Unity so that you can share more of your story. There are some questions that we just didn't have time to get to, but everyone be on the lookout for more information on Jim's next appearance with an event through Communities Foundation of Texas. You will receive that information so that you can plan to attend. So at this time, we will prepare to close out. Again, we want to thank you for being a part of tonight. Visit www.projectunity.net to learn more about what we're doing in the community as we help others and you all to listen, learn, and engage. Have a good night.
Thank you.